Justin Spaulding, Want to Know Wednesday. If you like this video, please like the channel, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment on what you want to know. If you don't know me and this is the first time coming across me, own and operate 1,500 apartment units, and we got about 200 investors that are in with us on those units as well. Today, talking a little bit about, I see a lot of people out there, I think they miss a lot of good deals. There's a lot of people saying, hey, there's no good deals out there. And I think part of the problem is you guys are only looking at one thing. You got to be able to open up your mindset and be able to look at each deal a little bit differently depending on a few different factors, right? You can't just look at a property and just look at the price per unit and decide if it's good or not, because you're going to immediately probably rule it out because you think the price per unit is too high, right? Well, you need to back up a little bit, and I'm going to talk about, there's 7 things I want to mention today. I think there's a lot more than 7 you need to look at, but I think there's 7 key things that you need to look at for each deal to decide if it's actually truly a good deal or not, just before you just go ahead and write off the deal and decide, hey, this is not a good deal. So the first one, I kind of just got a list right in front of me, and the first one is location, right? There are places, location-wise, that I'm obviously going to pay more than I would if that property, if you picked it up and moved it to another property. I've also passed on properties because of location, right? There's been properties where literally if you pick it up that I loved like the feel of the property, I loved, but the location, I couldn't get over the location. I thought that, but at the end of the day, when we turn to sell this, who's actually going to buy this deal from me? Who's going to buy in this location? If you could have take that deal, picked it up, and move it across, it was in Illinois, it was across the border. I'm in Wisconsin right now. If you could have taken that deal, picked it up, and moved it about 2 miles and put it into the Wisconsin side of the Wisconsin-Illinois border, I would have bought that deal all day long. So the first thing is location, right? And think about the locations that you want to be invested in. Now, the nice thing I think with real estate is, because of the cash flow, you're able to kind of push those boundaries a little bit, especially when you're just getting started, where you might be able to push the boundary a little bit and go buy a 4-unit. I mean, we've historically bought in places, and we've had success there that I would never go back, and we've since sold, that I would never ever go back and invest in an area like that again, even though we had a lot of success and whatnot. The headache of it, a little bit the danger aspect of it, just as far as being a rougher neighborhood and whatnot. But think about the location, and you need to realize that there are certain locations that you should be okay paying a little bit more for if it's a prime location. And by doing that and getting control of that asset over time, if it is a right location and you are right, over time that is only going to exponentially help grow the value of the property as well. So, but again, location isn't the only thing, right? So that's the first thing I had on my bullet point. And again, these bullet points I'm talking about, there's no specific order, but I'm just kind of going through there things that are on my brain. Number 2, cap rate, right? So you need to be able to look at the cap rate. What is the comparable cap rates? We've talked in other videos about other cap rates, or about what cap rates are, how they work and whatnot. So if you're unfamiliar with cap rates, you're just stumbling across this, you can go to my channel and we talk all about cap rates in a lot of different places, a lot of different videos. But you need to be able to look at the cap rate. What cap rate are other properties in that area trading at? What cap rate are other properties in that region trading at? You then also need to consider the size, right? Because the size will also usually, if it's a larger property, it's actually going to drive down the cap rate, and when you have a lower cap rate, the price is going to be more expensive. So size is another thing. I will pay more per door or a higher price I'll pay a higher price per unit for a pretty much identical property as far as like identical rents, identical condition, similar location. I will pay more per unit at a 100 unit than I'm going to pay for a 4 unit. I'm going to pay a lot more for a 300 unit than I'm going to pay for a 50 unit when it comes to a price per unit comparison. Because anytime that I have more scale in one location, that helps the efficiency of things. That helps on the back end of the sale because there's a lot deeper pockets, a lot more deep pockets chasing the larger deals trying to get scale than there are chasing a 4 unit, than there are chasing a 40 unit or a 50 unit. So size and scale is another thing. The third thing, another thing that I look at, this is really the 4th thing, price per unit. Right? So I've kind of already talked about price per unit. I do look at price per unit, but I don't say if it's greater than this price per unit, I'm not going to buy it. If it's greater than X a price per unit that I'm comfortable with, I might then ask myself, and go down the rest of this list. Is okay, well, is it a greater location? Is, what else could lift that price per unit that still makes that deal work? I've had a lot of people come to me and bring me deals and say, yeah, I'm not interested in this deal because the price per unit is just $10,000 a unit too high. And we've gone and we've bought the deal. And someone will come back to me and I'm like, well, you didn't look at like the location. You didn't look at the cap rate compared to the cap rate was higher. So really we're getting a deal, right? Rent multipliers. I'll have people that will look at a rent multiplier, and basically what a rent multiplier does, you take the yearly revenue, the yearly rents from the property, and you multiply it out to figure out what the price is, right? So if you're already given a price, and you know how many units it is and what the rent is, right? You can figure out what the rent multiplier is. So for example, if total rents on the year, I'm just going to try to pull some numbers together. If we have $1,000 a month rents and it's a 10-unit building, that's $10,000 a month times 12 is 100. $10,000 a month is it's $120,000 a year, right? So if that property were listed for $1.2 million, that would be a 10x multiplier, rent multiplier, because you're pulling in $120,000 a year and multiply that by 10, right? So now some people won't pay a rent multiplier, which rent multiplier is probably the least. I rarely ever look at it because it's, in my opinion, it is so irrelevant. But some people are just set on the fact they won't pay more than a 9 or a 10 rent multiplier. Whereas I'm sitting over here and I'm paying 13 or 14, 15 or 16 on the rent multiplier, and they're like, how are you doing that? I'm like, because I'm looking at the location, I'm looking at the cap rate, I'm looking at the scale, I'm looking at the price per unit, and you've got a deal here, right? But people miss out on it because they're only looking at a rent multiplier. Just like some of these other people are only looking at a cap rate. Some of these other people are only looking at a price per unit. Another thing to pay attention to and look at, and you can't always treat it equal, is I talked about before scale, right? And having overall total unit count be higher. Another thing to think about is the density of those units. Meaning, is the 300 units that you're looking at, is that across 45 acres? Or is it on, 1 acre, right? So how tall is it? How dense is that apartment community? The more dense it is, the less common area stuff you're going to have to take care of, such as lawn mowing, bush trimming of the bushes, spring cleanup, fall cleanup of the grounds. If you're in an area where it snows and you have snow removal, that 40-acre site, if it's 300 units, you're going to have a lot more on the snow removal versus if it's a quarter-acre site or a 2-acre site. You're going to have a lot less on the snow removal. So you need to think about, okay, how dense is this? Which the more dense it is, the less I'm going to have towards some of these contracted services in landscaping, in snow removal, right? From a price per door standpoint, on stuff that is, let's just use this for example. We've got a 199 unit. It's on about 17 acres. The price per unit per year on that to keep all those common grounds and have the contracted services, they're about $600 a door per year. We've got another site that is much more condensed. It's about $400 per door. So you have a $200 per door per year in that scenario, that specific scenario that we're saving. So that being said, where there's more density, we can pay a little bit more per unit because we have less cost on the back end, right? You got to be able to think about these things. Next thing, cash flow. All right, well, what's it cash flowing? There's some people that are only going to look at the cap rate, that are only going to look at the price per unit, that are only going to look at the rent multiplier, and they stop and they don't do any more homework because it didn't fit their one box. It didn't fit the one check mark, right? But if they would have gone all the way through with it and actually done the math and figured it out, they would have realized, oh man, this actually cash flows real well. This cash flows 6% in year one. This cash flows 10% in year one, even though the rent multiplier is 13. This cash flows 10% in year one. We've found deals like that, and people want to pass on it just because of rent multiplier, just because the cap rate isn't right. Next thing to look at and consider, CapEx, and how much deferred maintenance and deferred CapEx, capital expenditures, you're going to have on the property. So I'm willing to pay a little bit more for something that has brand new roofs. I'm willing to pay a little bit more for something that's got brand new asphalt, brand new roofs, brand new mechanicals like the HVAC systems. If the property has in-unit washer and dryers, if those washer and dryers are all within 2 years old, I'm willing to pay a little bit more, right? Now, if we're just talking just washer and dryers and the roof is still old and the driveway's still old and the mechanicals are still old, that's not going to get very much of a emphasis or credit from me. But again, the more that is newer, the less that I'm going to have to outflow to be able to upgrade and all that stuff in the coming years, whether it's the first year, the second year, the third year, the fourth year. I will be willing to pay more and perhaps a 13 rent multiplier or a price per unit that's 15% greater, 20%, 30% greater than someone else, because I'm taking into account what I'm going to have on the CapEx and what I'm going to have come out of my pocket for CapEx going forward, year one through our whole holding period. Those are 8 things that I gave you right there that you need to be open-minded with on each deal. Again, there's I could go on. There's probably a list of 50. These I think are the most important 8 that I gave you. So go through and each deal that comes across, look at each deal from each of these aspects. Stop looking at it just from cap rate and just price per unit, because you're going to miss out on a lot of deals. Again, going back to this, how people are asking, how are you still finding deals right now with interest rates rising and everything? Because I'm looking at every single deal from all these different viewpoints and vantages. I'm not just cookie cutter. We're not cookie cutter around here. I'm not one box checks all, right? Like if I can check off one box and just say yes, this hits the price per unit, and then if it doesn't, we don't buy it. I don't do that. I don't stop there. I take the location into account. I take the scale into account. I take the CapEx into account. I take the price per unit into account. I take the density into account. And more of you need to take more of those things into account, or you're right. You're never, ever, ever, ever going to find a deal. Or when you do find a deal, it's going to take you a lot longer to find your next deal because you're missing out on a lot of great deals.